Okay, hello everybody. I'm Markus Sabadello from Tech, also Decentralized Identity Foundation and contributing to W3C working groups. And I will talk a bit more about Decentralized Identifiers or DIDs. Drummond mentioned that already in his talk. And I will just give a bit more of an overview of what are DIDs, what's the background. What do they enable, what kind of functionality and properties, some technologies related to that, and then a few ideas also on how DIDs and the Agentic Web fit together. Let's start just on a very general level, decentralized identifiers. What are identifiers? Identifiers are addresses, names, numbers, right? You can see some traditional identifiers here on the slide, like email addresses, names, phone numbers, IP addresses, domain names. Those are identifiers, and identifiers are always the basis for a lot of other things, right? We need identifiers for exchanging data, for sending messages. Without identifiers, we cannot establish relationships or connections. We cannot enable transactions or higher level concepts such as trust and reputation. All of this, all of communication, all of identity requires identifiers at the basis. And so most traditional identifiers that you see here are somehow based on central authorities, right? Or some kind of intermediaries that issue the names and the numbers and the addresses. And so at some point, a few years ago, or maybe several years ago, there was an insight that identities and therefore identifiers should be decentralized, right? That's the self-sovereign identity movement, the idea that who I am online should be something that I can control, and that's not determined by companies or governments. So about 10 years ago, it was now 10 years ago, hard to believe, but there was a first paper that articulated this vision, decentralized public key infrastructure, right? So the question which this paper asked was, what should be the act through which a digital identity is established, right? How do I get a digital identity? And the answer was a digital identity should be not issued to me, should not be given to me by a government or a company, but should be something that I can establish on my own using cryptography, using decentralized networks. And so that was the initial concept, to have a decentralized infrastructure for identifiers and cryptography and public keys, to then build a lot of other things on top of that. And then the manifestation or the realization of that idea is the DID, the Decentralized Identifier, which is a standard now at W3C, version 1, and version 1.1 is coming out soon. And so this is a specification which defines a common syntax and a common data model for identifiers, right? You can see they can look different, so there are different types of DIDs, the so-called DID methods. You see some examples here. So DIDs provide a kind of abstraction layer, which means that DIDs can be created through different technologies such as blockchains or traditional web servers. That's what these DID methods define. But the common properties are, they are designed to be decentralized, verifiable, cryptographically verifiable, persistent, and resolvable, and as I said, created and managed in a decentralized way without a dependency on a central authority. Here are just a few more examples of types of DIDs, DID methods. Again, some of them use blockchain, some of them use other decentralized networks, some of them are also web-based. One interesting one is the last one here in the list, DID's KID, that's getting quite some attention right now. That's a type of identifier, a type of DID that's completely location independent. So it's an identifier that you create using a wallet, using cryptography alone, and it doesn't go away, right? It's persistent. Nobody can take it away from you. It doesn't depend on a blockchain or a web server. It just depends on cryptography and control of private keys. And so one of the most important technical functions of DIDs is DID resolution, which means that once you have a DID, you can look up technical metadata about the subject identified by that DID. And most importantly, that means public keys and service endpoints. So if I give you my DID, let's say by scanning a QR code or by giving you a link, then you can look up my public keys, which enables authenticated and encrypted connections. And you can look up service endpoints. So you can look up mechanisms on how to communicate with me. This can be something like XMPP, ActivityPub, Matrix, or other protocols for interactions. One of the things that's very important here is that the document can be updated without having to change the identifier. So that's what makes the identifier persistent, as we call it. And this means that if I update, let's say, my keys, if I rotate my keys, I don't have to change my identifier. If I update my services, I don't have to change my identifier. So for example, if I move my XMPP account or my Matrix account or my ActivityPub service from one server to another, I don't have to recreate my address book. I don't have to recreate my social network, right? Because there's this indirection layer where my identifier stays the same even if I change the location of services. And so a few more basic functions that DIDs enable. On one hand, DIDs enable signatures and what's called verifiable credentials, right? A DID is an identifier with associated public keys. So if you have a verifiable credential, which is something like a digital equivalent of an identity document, right? Whether it's a passport or a birth certificate or driver's license or a digital diploma from a university or any other kind of semantic statement, those are signed using DIDs, right? So any issuer can make a statement about a subject, and it's all enabled using DIDs and cryptographic signatures and verified using the public keys of the DID. That's one basic function. Another basic function is just authentication, just sign in, right? A DID is an identifier. I can, with associated public keys, so I can always prove control of that identifier to authenticate. The third basic function, I already talked about that a little bit. DIDs enable discovery of services, right? Given a DID, you can discover a Matrix endpoint, an ActivityPub endpoint, an agent endpoint, right? So it's this idea of portability also, because the location of these services can change even without changing the identifier. And fourth basic function is, as what follows from the other functions, is DIDs enable persistent connections, right? So if we all exchange our DIDs in a similar way as, in a way as Drummond also described with verifiable relationship credentials, then those relationships, they persist, right? Even if I rotate my keys, I change my public keys, I change the endpoints of my services. So DIDs really enable connections not between clients and servers, not connections between endpoints, but connections between us, between people and businesses. They can also enable an entire new way of modeling relationships between companies and their customers, social relationships, communities. This is basically the idea that DIDs and the connections between DIDs are about modeling in the digital world what we have in the real world, right? The relationships between people and organizations and governments and so on. Here is a list of just a few more building blocks or technologies that are under development in the community right now, like verifiable credentials. I'm sorry, how much time do I have? Do I have left? Okay, little more. Okay, so just a few things that are also under development in the community: verifiable credentials, protocols like DITCOM and the trust spanning protocol that Wenjing will talk about, and decentralized web nodes. I'll mention that again in another slide, and other protocols and technologies for verifiable credentials, for establishing trust, and other things. So I now want to talk about, if I have more time, I'm sorry, I'm losing track a little bit of how much time I have, but some ideas for now how DIDs can help the agentic web, right? So here are three different ideas actually that I have on a few slides. The first idea is verifiable data supply chain. I don't actually have such a strong background in AI, but my understanding is that there's often a question of where the data comes from that's used for training AI models. And so we can say that DIDs and technologies like verifiable credentials and data integrity and signatures, all of that together can enable authenticity and provenance of data, right? So that if you train your AI agent, you could actually verify if the data comes, let's say, from an accredited university or from a hospital or from individuals who are employees of a company, right? So this is this could fit in with the MCP protocol, I believe. There was some mention of identity in MCP yesterday, where external data, external context is being consumed by agents. So DIDs can provide a way of adding authenticity and provenance to the sources of that data. That's the first idea. The second idea is personal AI agents that a lot of people have also already talked about. In our community with DIDs, there has also been the concept for a long time of services or digital locations online where I can manage my identity, my personal data. There have been these ideas like personal clouds, personal data stores, decentralized web nodes. So a location that's not a Google Cloud, or right, that's not a centralized service, but a place where I can store my profiles, my address, my playlists, my documents, my calendar, in a decentralized way, in a place that I control. And then an interesting idea could be a personal agent that connects to these data stores that are under my control, right? And then I would be able to have an agent that has access to all the context of one person, right? So my data, my digital identity would become the context for the personal agent. The lady from Google yesterday was talking about a memory bank, right? After I use my agent, the results from the agent could also be fed back and stored not into a Google Cloud maybe, but into a node or a service that I control, that belongs to me. This becomes even more interesting, I think, when we combine that with DIDs and decentralized web nodes and services of friends and people in my social network, right? You could imagine my friends sharing parts of their data, parts of their identity with me, and then my personal agent acting on that. An example would be if I have a personal agent that could access not only my own data and my own identity, but also, let's say, my friend's playlists. If my personal agent, if that is able to access my playlists, my music preferences, but also those of my friends, then when we go to a party, the agent could select music that we all like because it has this access to to identity and data in my social network. Or food preferences, right? If I'm connected to my friends using DIDs and verifiable credentials and these technologies, then an agent that has access to this decentralized data would be able to select restaurants maybe that we all like. So this is the second idea, the personal agents connected to decentralized data. And the third idea is basically what others have also already said at the conference, identity for agents themselves, right? This is what Drummond talked about with VRCs for agents. This is also what Mr. Chang mentioned yesterday with the agent network protocol, right? Where agents and people and organizations all have DIDs, all have identities, right? And you would have authenticated, encrypted communication between the individuals, organizations, and the agents, using private channels, using pairwise connections. And this, I think, is the most powerful way how DIDs and Agentic Web, how that fits together, right? This is then when you can build all the basic functions of DIDs, discovery, portability, what I mentioned already. You can build this kind of network not just between people, but also between people and agents. And once you add verifiable credentials, you get authorization, you get reputation, you can get trust. You can imagine verifiable credentials for agents, right? How do you know if this is an agent that's actually trusted for traveling topics, right? Or a trusted agent when it comes to food recommendations. So trust and identity about agents, you can imagine agents issuing credentials, you can imagine a web of trust between credentials, you can imagine basically a dynamic decentralized network and ecosystem and economy between people and organizations and agents enabled by the DIDs and the connections and verifiable credentials. So my last slide, what I found, how these two communities fit together, decentralized identity and the Agentic Web, what they have in common is the concept of autonomy and independence, right? These are the two words that I see a lot in both community. Decentralized identity enables the autonomic, independent technical infrastructure for identity, for sharing data, for establishing connections. And the Agentic Web is all about agents and processes that are happening partially on its own in an independent way. And I think that's the combined vision of these two communities, a decentralized network between the individuals, organizations, things, and agents. And